Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here for ACFCS's, what we like to call it, the Metcalf series, the human trafficking, anti-human trafficking educational series, free to the community, to let you know and see what we have to offer with the GOAT, what does GOAT stand for again?
Greatest
Whatever,
of all time.
of all time. Greatest of all time. Thank you. I screwed it up right out of the get-go. The greatest of all time for getting the education for anti-human trafficking out. And he's brought another GOAT with him, Alina. Kevin Metcalf is here. And our other guest speaker is Alina Donahue, which I'll be getting into. Today, we're going to be talking about forced criminality, something that I didn't even think about until Kevin brought it up to me to say there are a lot of things that happen when you are dealing with child labor or sex trafficking, and the things that certain people are made to do they have to be punished afterwards? Is it something that has to happen? We're going to get into it and a lot more, and as you see from our learning objectives. But first, there's a lot of folks out here that are new because this is an open to the community webinar, and we like seeing where you're from. We've got some folks from Texas. Texas is right here representing. Thank you very much. Toronto, Florida, thanks so much for being here. I saw someone from Bangladesh. Amazing that you're on right now. So really appreciate you from Toronto as well. Keep them coming. Let us know where you're from. Always keep the chat civil and network with one another in the chat. The Q&A box is actually there to be able to get your questions that are fit for the content. They're content related. So make sure you use the Q&A box for your questions for the content to the speakers, and the attendee chat, which is awesomely used right now. Tell us where you're from, is for you to talk and to chat about the content itself. We have to do troubleshooting. There's a lot of new people on here. So with troubleshooting, and if you're having any audio or visual issues, make sure that you're on the correct browser, which is Chrome or Firefox. Refresh that browser. That should bring you right back into the live session. Close out all the other browsers and tabs. And closed captioning is also available on the media player. The media player is where we are right now in the little box. It's got a lower left-hand corner or right-hand corner, white circle with a CC. Click on that, and you should be able to see us right then and there, the closed captioning. Again, I did talk a little about logistics earlier. The certificate of completion will be available to all ACFCS members in their learning portal up to about 3 days or so. You can also get a certificate of completion, I believe, if you watch 80% of the webinar. I could be wrong about that one, but I have to contact customer support to make sure that one's there. Your recording and slides are on your resources portion of the console. Go ahead and click that open. It says slide deck, and you'll be able to follow right along with our speakers. The post-webinar survey, let us know what you'd like to hear more of, especially in the Metcalf series. We want to know what types of subtopics in the, I know, I'm just running with that, Kevin, the Metcalf series, what kinds of subtopics you'd like to hear about and learn about in the anti-human trafficking space. All of this is leading up to our big January National Anti-Human Trafficking Awareness Month, where we will have 7 webinars in the month of January, 1 free to the community and 6 for our members only. So we're going to be we're starting it off now and saying, guess what? There's so much that we have to learn about the anti-human trafficking space so that we can combat it. I've already talked about the Q&A and all that good stuff. And so now, finally, to stop me talking, luckily, Alina Donahue is the founder of Human Trafficking Education and Response Academy. Alina, tell us a little about yourself while I put up the poll question.
Right, absolutely. So welcome, everyone. It's such an honor to be here. So excited to be here with my colleague, Kevin, and with Aaron. Thank you all so much for having me. Yeah, it's just wonderful. So I work in the anti-trafficking, the human trafficking field, right? And I founded a company called the Human Trafficking Education and Response Academy. What is that? It sounds really fancy. It has this long name, right? So pretty much the reason I started this academy is because there's so much knowledge to be shared and to share with the world on human trafficking, right? Where I focus and where I come in is bridging the gap between survivors and law enforcement, right? So I go across the country and I train law enforcement on human trafficking. Now, the information that we share and that we educate on is something you will not find in a textbook. It's something that you will not find in a fancy classroom, right? It's real life, real world experiences brought to you in a classroom setting. Because at the end of the day, this is a real issue. This is a real problem. And it is happening. It is happening in our backyards. It's happening across the world, in our countries, in our cities, right? And it's something that we have to address. So I truly believe that by educating law enforcement and community leaders, those within the communities, those that come from all walks of life, by educating them on the realities of human trafficking, I truly believe we can make a difference, right? Sometimes it's not just attending a human trafficking 101 class, right? Sometimes it's hearing it from people who have walked those walks of life, that have survived it, that have experienced it. And I think getting it from that perspective will really set people up for success on how to identify red flags, on what to do when you encounter it. So at the academy, what we do is we train law enforcement. We also do a lot of work with communities, with NGOs, and it's just a wonderful thing. So I'm honored to be here. Thank you so much, Kevin, for having me on as a guest, and Aaron as well. So
what you're doing is so important. Yeah, absolutely. Kevin Metcalf, I really hit you up here and I pumped you up, so don't disappoint. No pressure. No, you never do. You never do. Kevin, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, so my background is, of course, I'm old. I added up the other day, and I've got over 35 years of some sort of government service. Went through basic training in the Army in 1988. So I've been either in state, local, federal or military law enforcement for a little over 20 years. And then I went to law school and I prosecuted for probably 10 or 12 years, somewhere around there, and really got a focus in technology, which led me heavily into child exploitation, prosecuted, I don't know how many of those. And it also got me into human trafficking, sextortion, and all sorts of other things. So that's a brief overview of my background. And probably in the last 6 or 7 years, I've been in 20 plus countries. So I've been able to see what's going on in a lot of other places, how they are handling it. And they also look up to us that we have all the answers. And I remember in Pakistan making a point that we don't have any answers. And the other thing I'd like to point out is people look at me as an expert. Maybe I am in some things, but when you get to human trafficking, the only experts in this field are either the traffickers themselves, which you see a few of those out here coming out, or the victim/survivors. And the survivors are the primary experts that I continuously learn from. Alina, I've been incredibly impressed with her knowledge and her ability to communicate and her durability, because you can see that this takes a toll. I mean, it takes a toll on people like me, but it also takes a toll on our survivors who are brave enough to step up and say, this is what I experienced, this is what I went through. And they expose that for the world to see so that they can save others. Just want to point that out to everybody.
Absolutely. Thank you both for being here and for what you're doing and for educating our community, because that's the biggest crux of this. They need the education, and that's why all of them are here. And speaking of that, as you were talking, Kevin, it is important to understand what they're going through. And I've put in the attendee chat a link to our ACFCS's Detecting and Understanding Human Trafficking learning module. It has also been created by another survivor named Alina Donahue, who is also very passionate about this. And she helped us create this 3-hour learning course. It's not just about red flags. It's not just about looking at a spreadsheet. It's about understanding the mindset, the psychological impact that this has, and what people like, say, the first line bank tellers can see when they're at their banks or their financial institutions. They can see inside people. So this one is a labor of love. And I definitely want to push that to let you guys understand that this is really important. So, all right, with that, I'm going to stop plugging and see what we've got here. Have you personally worked on any forced criminality, criminal exploitation cases within human trafficking? So we've got 18.6% of our folks here have, and 62% say no. I was expecting more, actually, and 17% no or other. Tell us in the chat. And so I'll have to look at the chat to see what other means for some of the folks. Gloria writes, when I was at university, I volunteered with an organization that do rescues to victims that's trafficked to South Korea and China. That's God's work right there. Thank you so much for doing that, Gloria. And we're so glad to have you here. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Kevin.
Excellent. I was just looking at some of the comments here. All right, everybody. I'm glad we have quite a few attendees today, which I'm glad to see. And we are very fortunate. As I mentioned earlier, the only real experts here are the traffickers or the victims and survivors themselves. And that's why we're so fortunate to have Alina here today. And if your organization is looking for training, of course, Aaron has some training. We have a lot of training here specifically for you, but if you want to have a whole different level, Alina has developed some amazing training. I've been very impressed with that, learned a lot from her. So what I'd like to do is to start this off is to turn this over to Alina and just let her take the show for a little bit. But what I want you to pay attention to, we all know when we talk about human trafficking, and this is pretty much anywhere in the world, the number one thing that pops into everybody's head that everybody thinks about is commercial sex trafficking. It's got sex in the title. It's going to sell. So commercial sex trafficking, that's the big thing everybody thinks about. We've also talked about labor trafficking. One of the things, and I have talked to prosecutors and attorneys this week, and I've been having to explain forced criminality. And these are people who claim to know what human trafficking is. So I'm telling you that this is an area that most people don't understand. And I think Alina does an amazing job at sharing her experiences with it and talking about it. But forced criminality is basically the coercion to commit crimes under the control of a trafficker. So Alina, without me rambling on anymore, I'll let you do your thing, and then we will pick up the discussion when you finish that.
Perfect. Thank you so much to the both of you. All right, so let's dive right into it. So as Kevin said, forced criminality. Forced criminality is involved, I would confidently say, in almost every single human trafficking case, right? And when human trafficking, we have to understand that it's not just sexual trafficking. There is labor trafficking, right? But at the end of the day, what's the purpose of forced criminality? It's a fancy word that many don't understand or haven't really fully grasped the concept of it, right? To put it in simple words or in simple meaning, forced criminality, it's just another stream of revenue, right? Where the audience today, the audience is focused, you all work within the financial sector, right? So think about it like this. Forced criminality, it's simply another revenue stream. But in this case, when it comes to human trafficking, it's another revenue stream for the trafficker. There is no limit to what this forced criminality would entail, right? And it's all criminal. It's all within the criminal enterprise, but that affects everyone within the financial sector. Because if you start thinking about it, if you all have seen the numbers, the 2024 NASDAQ report, NASDAQ put together this report, and like they put together the top 10 criminal enterprises, right? Like how people are getting scammed, or all these illegal enterprises on a global level. Human trafficking was in that top 10 category. But here's something that a lot of people don't think about. 6 of those 9, right, eliminating human trafficking, 6 of those 9 other categories are encompassed within human trafficking. So I've put together this, this case study for you all, so you all understand how this truly takes place and what forced criminality is and what it looks like in an everyday case scenario, right? This is happening every single day. To people you may or may not know, to victims. It's happening to a lot of victims. Many survivors and victims of human trafficking have experienced forced criminality in some way, shape, or form. So we're going to dive right into this case study so I could take you through this journey and explain to you how easy it is to fall victim to forced criminality and how traffickers target their victims and create these additional revenue streams, illegal revenue streams, to create more money, right? So the purpose of forced criminality, it's to make money, right? That's all it is. The purpose of forced criminality is for the bad guy, in this case, the trafficker, also known as a pimp, to make money. It's further exploitation for their victims, for greed, for financial gain of the trafficker, right? So this particular case study took place in 2012. The trafficker's last name, Minaya, and then we have trafficking victim, Perez. So for this particular case study, this is the trafficker. This is a real life case study. This is not something that was composed. These are real life pictures. So here we have trafficker Minaya. He is a known gang member. His nationality is Hispanic. He's already had multiple arrests, many of them including lewd and lascivious. That lewd and lascivious charge was for molestation of that particular victim being between the ages of 12 to 15. Already a convicted sex offender. And this, right, the scope of this trafficker is really the scope from a law enforcement perspective, right? It's like, so you get to know the trafficker, where their ties are, where they are, how many victims have they had, right? What kind of trafficker was he? He was known as a Romeo trafficker, and the Romeo trafficker is pretty much an individual who portrays themselves as a boyfriend, right? And victims, that is very often, victims will very often encounter a Romeo trafficker. So here right now on the screen, you'll see Minaya. These are his actual mugshots. His look varies depending on, you know, whatever stage he's going through in his criminal life, right? Next, we have the victim. So for this particular case, we have the victim, last name Perez. This particular victim, which is very common, you're going to see this in the financial industry, right? You're going to encounter individuals that have no prior criminal history, right? They've never done anything wrong, right? For this particular victim, from a law enforcement perspective, so you understand this victim, no childhood trauma history whatsoever, no gang affiliation. She was 21 years old at the time when she met Minaya. She was a sophomore in college, straight A student, and lived with both parents, right? You may be thinking to yourself, I'm in the financial sector. We're 3 slides in. How does this have anything to do with me? All right, really quick. She's in college. Does she have a loan? Does she not have a loan? All these things play a pivotal role, an important role within the finance industry, right? So trafficker meets the victim. The grooming process begins. As we all know, if you've taken the trafficking live webinar that we did a few weeks ago, we went into detail about the grooming timeline for this particular trafficker. This is how quickly things escalated, right? So in late November of 2011, Minaya met Perez, his victim, at a local nightclub. The trafficker's characteristics were charming, handsome, down to earth, friendly, outgoing, well liked by many, right? So there were mutual friends in common. The next day on Facebook, this particular victim, she posted a selfie on Facebook expressing how amazing the night before was. She had a great time. A few days later, Minaya invites her over to hang out. He pressures her into having sex with him, right? We're going to go continuing on the grooming timeline. By the end of November, they decide to start dating, right? Minaya says, you're amazing. Let's start dating. And he justifies everything that he does towards her, you know, pushing her boundaries and everything. He justifies it as love. One thing with human trafficking is every single victim has a vulnerability. We all have a vulnerability, if you think about it. This particular victim's vulnerability was love. She just wanted to be loved, right? By December of 2011, Minaya begins pushing her sexual boundaries. Again, it's all part of the grooming tactics, part of the grooming timeline. And then by January of 2012, within 2 months of meeting, they move in together, right? Once again, you might be thinking, okay, grooming timeline, I'm following. How does this, you know, how does this fit into the sector that I work in? Okay, well, they move in together, right? Now you have to think like, okay, they move in together. Who signed the lease? Who's paying for the lease? How are these transactions being made, right? All of this ties into the finance industry. By the end of January 12, the scheme begins, right? And the scheme begins in the sense that the trafficking begins. Minaya pretty much convinces and forces, right? His victim, Perez, to attend a modeling ad interview, which ends up actually being a total lie, and it ends up being an initiation process into the trafficking world. If you all remember, there used to be a website called Backpage.com, very similar to Craigslist, except they actually had an adult section on Backpage.com. This no longer exists whatsoever. It's taken down by our government. But Backpage.com used to have an adult section where you could actually go in and look for escorts all across the country, right? So these are, and again, this all ties into the finance industry, right? Because if you think about it, in this adult section on Backpage.com, what was this website back in the day, they are, you know, there's an escort section, body rep, there's all these different sections. And again, it all ties into the finance industry, because how are they making their money, right? All with illegal acts, you know, there's money laundering involved. There's all these things being involved, and it affects many. It doesn't just affect the victim. This human trafficking affects many as a whole. So this is an actual picture. This is a real life picture. This is the trafficker Manaya, and it's a picture that was actually taken randomly, and this is his victim. But we continue to go into the trafficking timeline for this particular victim. By January 2012, due to that fake online ad, this particular victim was initiated into the human trafficking world. This was actually the man, another man who trafficked and raped her into this the trafficking world. But yeah, so Perez, once a deal goes bad with Perez and the guy who raped her boyfriend Manaya ends up taking over, and he becomes her primary trafficker, her primary pimp. By March 2012, the forced criminality component begins. So Manaya is giving his victim Perez ultimatums. You can go and meet these men, right? And you can make me a certain amount of money, which in the trafficking world is called a quota. You can go and meet, let's say the goal for that day is $2,000. You can make me $2,000 for the day, or I just stole these credit cards, go buy me things of value. Again, this is affecting those within the finance industry. One, where did that credit card come from? How did he steal it? Who did it belong to? That's credit card theft, right? That's identity theft. Then once the victim uses that credit card to buy things of value to sell in the street, right? That is fraud, right? Now we have the victim that is using a stolen credit card, that is, you know, portraying herself as whoever is on the credit card. That's identity theft. Then purchasing things of value. That is theft, right? Every state has their different, you know, laws and statutes on how that grand theft or scheme to defraud. But all of these charges start taking in place. But again, it all affects the finance industry, because think about it. There's credit card theft going on. That person that's a victim of credit card theft is now calling many of these institutions, right? And it's affecting their credit. It's affecting, you know, there's money loss. Do they have to lose do they lose their jobs? Do they have to miss work, you know, to file a complaint? All of this ties in. So human trafficking, I don't think people realize how much human trafficking affects everyone as a whole, how it affects everyone in so many different components of their life without us even thinking about it, right? So forced criminality, it's a big topic that many of us have yet to truly comprehend as a whole. So to give you a quick example, so this continues on the timeline. Their forced criminality has begun. So they're being arrested for, you know, these charges that are being committed, right? Many of them being credit card fraud, impersonation. So they go to jail. They're released on bond, but the forced criminality continues. The forced criminality doesn't stop just because these two have been to jail and are out of jail. The forced criminality absolutely continues. So even though they have been released from, you know, released on bond, the victim is still being forced to, you know, is still being trafficked. And then on top of that is still being forced to commit crimes against her will. Now you may ask yourself, is it really against her will? Yes, because she is being given ultimatums. So she is being coerced, right? She's being coerced into committing these crimes. And what we don't think about from a victim's personality, or a victim, not even a personality, but from their perspective, is they are in fight or flight mode. They are doing everything that they can to survive another day. They are not living week to week, you know, how we all plan out our days, our weeks, our months, even our years, right? These victims are living hour to hour, day by day, just trying to survive. So the forced criminality component continues. And then Manaya introduces to his victim another stream of revenue, right? I'm trying to explain it within the finance industry so you all understand it completely. But here's another stream of revenue, illegal revenue that the trafficker Manaya comes up with. And I'll show you right here. This is actual live footage, right? Um, this is one of the live footage that was sent out when the cops were looking for them. But Manaya said, does anyone remember back in 2012, the big housing crisis, right? Many couldn't afford to pay their mortgages. A lot of homes went into foreclosure. So across the country, there were a lot of empty homes, right? So Manaya comes up with this brilliant idea, this brilliant illegal idea to, hey, we're going to rent these homes out, but we don't own these homes and no one's going to actually move in, right? So they begin, the trafficker Manaya, he starts telling his victim Perez, he's like, all right, this is what we're going to do, and you're going to be the face. You're going to be the face that all of these potential tenants are going to see. So again, the victim continues to be victimized and further exploited, not just as a victim of trafficking, sexual trafficking, right? Being raped on a daily basis, but also being a victim of forced criminality and all of these financial crimes that she is committing against her will. So this is an additional revenue stream that Manaya had come up with. And he said, we're going to rent homes to people. They're going to give us their down payments, their first and last months, whatever it is that they want to give us. And then we're going to give them a fake key. And that was another revenue stream that came up for Manaya. Actually, after 8 months, the cops ended up, catching up to them with all of the crimes being committed, and they are both arrested. So they are both arrested for all of these crimes unrelated to human trafficking, which happens every single day. A lot of victims and traffickers are being arrested for crimes unrelated to human trafficking. But we as professionals know them as forced criminality. And you all within the financial district will identify as credit card fraud, or financial theft, or identity fraud, or all of those within that realm, right? But from a professional standpoint, we miss it every single day. We miss it because we are so focused on, well, these two were committing crimes that have nothing to do with human trafficking, but the reality has everything to do with human trafficking, because this victim was being forced to commit these crimes against her will, right? So what ended up happening? So they go to jail, right? Manaya gets convicted to 18 months prison time, all charges unrelated to trafficking. And then Perez gets convicted and sentenced to 12 months of jail time, followed by 4 years probation. Again, all charges unrelated to trafficking, right? And it's important to note that this particular victim, right? So she does her jail time, she finishes jail, and now how does this affect her? It affects her in the sense that forced criminality, it's an ever-ending problem. How is it an ever-ending problem? It's an ever-ending problem because when she got out of jail, this victim got out of jail, she knew that she had just got out of jail, and she's thinking to herself, why am I in jail? If I was forced to commit these crimes, I complied with my abuser. I did what I had to do to survive, yet I have to do jail time. She gets out of jail. She's now a convicted felon with many charges on her record. It's hard for her to get a job. It's hard for her to secure housing. It's hard for her to, go back into school. Maybe now she can enroll back in college, but maybe she can't, she doesn't qualify for financial aid because of her record. So now she has to get a loan, right? Whereas with her good grades, she could have qualified for financial aid. But with this record now that she has, she doesn't. Do you see where I'm going with this? This is an ever-ending cycle when it comes to trafficking victims. And it very much involves the finance industry, and it very much involves the finance sector, because this is an ever-ending problem. The good news that I have, right, after explaining all of this, the good news that I have is that this particular victim did make it out. She did make it out, and she ended up doing fantastic things. But one of the things that she was able to do, right, was the fact that she was able to showcase that had she never been a victim of trafficking, she would have never accumulated these charges to begin with. So in 2018, she actually had the opportunity to go to court and show and tell her story, show her case, and prove her case, with the support of being able to prove all of that and testify to it. But she was able to have all those charges expunged. That's just one person. That is just one person. We are talking about victims in the millions that are struggling with this every single day. I confidently say millions because we struggle with a reporting issue in the human trafficking sector. But just to kind of show you that this is a real case, I can say this is a real case because this was my case. This was my case. This is Manaya. He was my trafficker. This is my actual mugshot. My actual mugshot. My charges no longer exist, but what I went through was real, right? Being given ultimatums, right? And then being punished for accepting those ultimatums. That's what makes human trafficking real. That's what makes forced criminality prevalent to all, not just one particular sector, right? When I got out of jail back in 2013, I did my best to reintegrate back into society. I did my best to, be independent, right? Go get a phone. I couldn't get a phone from any of the major companies because I didn't have good credit, because my credit was high, drastically affected, right? My credit score was atrocious when I got out of jail. I think it was 523, which is crazy, right? That affects every single person on this live because you're in the finance industry. Because you might be saying, well, no, I can't help you with a loan. I can't help you secure anything or a home or anything like that. But there's a backstory to that. And it's important that we all be educated on it, right? So even though, I'm a wonderful success story and I'm so blessed and happy to be where I am today and to be here in front of you all. But it took a long time to get here. It took years. So, Kevin and I, we go out and we educate as much as we can because there's thousands, hundreds of thousands of victims out there that are experiencing the difficulties that it is to encounter forced criminality, to go through forced criminality, and then wanting a better life, but then having to deal with the aftermath of being involved in forced criminality against your will. And just to show you, before I pretty much end my presentation, here are some more pictures. So these are real pictures. That was my driver's license. That was me and Manaya. That was our picture that was showcased on the news when they were looking for us for all of that mortgage defrauding scheme, right? That was a picture that I was forced to take, when I was being, trafficked. That is a picture of me in my parents' living room. Some people might look at that picture and be like, she's just on her phone. The reality is I was on my phone making sure that if my trafficker texted me, because he would allow me a certain amount of time to see my parents, but there's a story behind every picture, right? There's a story behind every picture, and these pictures are real, and the issue is real on forced criminality. And I talk about forced criminality because I think people just think that human trafficking is either somebody's being forced to work with a low wage and horrible living conditions, which is awful, or somebody's being sexually trafficked, which is just as awful, but there's so many more components to it. So that is my presentation on forced criminality. I'll hand it back to Kevin. I'm happy to answer any questions later on. But truly, giving that perspective on forced criminality is so, so important because people just think, oh, well, she did that because she wanted to. But the reality is I was coerced, and so many more are coerced. So thank you all so much. I truly appreciate it. But Kevin, I will hand it back to you.
Thank you. That was wonderful. But before we shift, if there are any questions, please drop them in the Q&A. And I think there's one here that I'm thinking on multiple levels. It says, was Perez reported as a missing person once the trafficking started? And there are so many things that pop into my head with that. Can you just talk a little about, were you missing? Were you reported missing? Did you have a relationship with your family while this was going on? And,
Great question. So I was never reported missing because if you think about it, I really wasn't missing. So my background, I grew up in a conservative Catholic home with both of my parents. No childhood trauma, as we talked about in the beginning. But here's the thing. Traffickers, abusers, predators, they all know how to control your environment, right? They assess the good, the bads, and all of it, right? The good, the bad, the ugly. So with me, my trafficker knew that I had a strong bond with my family. There was nothing that he was going to do to ruin that, or not even ruin that, but to prevent that, right? So for example, I'll give you a perfect example of how he controlled the environment. Till this day, I'm in my late 30s. Till this day, I still call my mom every night at 9 o'clock to say goodnight. Manaya knew that. It did not matter within those 8 months of being trafficked. It did not matter what was happening. Everything stopped at 9 o'clock. And I had to call my mom to say goodnight to keep that somewhat norm scenario, right? I was never reported missing because if you think about it, again, think about domestic violence. It's all about a controlled environment, right? Pretty much it's similar to human trafficking. So for me, I worked at the mall, but I also babysat for very affluent families, right? So what I ended up telling my parents was, oh, I'm just going to continue babysitting for these families. And these families travel often. So that was my excuse, right? So Manaya could continue to traffic me. And that was the excuse that I was told to tell my parents per Manaya, right? So I was never reported missing. A lot of these trafficking scenarios, believe it or not, many are missing. Yes, absolutely. Many are missing. But if you think about it, a lot of them is just about the controlled environment. Traffickers will assess the situation and they will portray the situation based on needs and assessment. That's how it will happen, right? So for me, I never had to be reported missing because if my parents express any sort of concern or anything, Manaya would bring me back home just enough to where my parents were like, things are not that bad. It's okay, right? So it's all about the controlled environment. So I hope I answered that question.
Yes. And did your parents know your trafficker?
They did, because they didn't know my trafficker. They met him, I think, on like 2 or 3 separate occasions. They weren't fond of him, but again, he portrayed himself as a boyfriend, So his image to portray was that as of a boyfriend, right? He wasn't the ideal boyfriend, but I was so head over heels that I was just like, no, mom and dad, you guys just don't understand. I'm in love, right? So these are real life scenarios that are happening every single day. And I encourage every single parent, be involved with your children. Be involved with your children, right? It's so crucial.
So,
By no means did I have bad parents. I had wonderful parents, but I was pushing them away because I thought they didn't know. They didn't know any better.
so Alina, I'm sure that we have a lot of parents in this audience. So let's just step into the horrifying part for them.
Mm-hmm.
You were not. So when people think of human trafficking, especially here in the U.S., you're thinking of people, and you mentioned vulnerabilities. When people think of vulnerabilities, they're thinking of people living on the street,
Mm-hmm.
out here with a horrible addiction or something like that. When you were, and yours is, you were started as a Romeo trafficking scenario. Can you describe your life? I know you had the same parents, conservative Catholic upbringing. I'm assuming you
Mm-hmm.
guys weren't in poverty. You made good grades. You
Mm-hmm.
were in college. I mean, just kind of describe that scenario, because as a parent, I'm really, even right now, I'm sitting here just thinking, who are my daughters seeing and
Right.
what's going on here? Can you just describe
Right.
that? And then
Yeah.
secondarily, once you do, maybe give them something they can look at. What can parents, if your adult daughter is bringing somebody over and you said your parents didn't really like them, are there indicators, red flags? What can they look for?
Right. So to give you kind of a background on me, so I straight A student. Um, so when I was in college or when I was accepted into college, I was actually accepted into UConn. But unfortunately, the economy was not good at that time, so I couldn't afford to go to UConn. But my parents couldn't afford to pay that out of state tuition. So I ended up going to college locally, but I was a straight A student. I lived at home, very much family oriented. Um, till this day, still am. But I didn't have many boyfriends because my parents were so overprotective. So I didn't have a lot of experience with dating. I didn't know what red flags were. I just knew that I wanted love. And if someone gave me my idea of love, I thought that was good, right? Um, when my parents met my boyfriend, he portrayed himself as a nice guy. He was so helpful. What can I do? If there was ever a family gathering, he wanted to help. Very much involved the day of. My dad wasn't going for it, and I was very, very, very close to my dad. So whenever my dad would say, I just don't think this guy is good, I just don't think he's right for you, I would go back to my boyfriend and I would say, gosh, my dad is just not a fan. And he would instill the idea, your dad just doesn't know me, I'm a good person, he's judging by looks or whatever. There was always an excuse to the scenario. There was always some sort of reason of why my boyfriend was right and everyone else was wrong, right? And again, I grew up in a good home. I grew up in a good home with no trauma, nothing. My upbringing was absolutely fantastic. Some signs, definitely, I would say I wish my parents would have been more involved, in the sense that they would have just talked to me more. Like I said, I was raised in a conservative Catholic home, so many conversations were taboo. Many conversations we did not have, just because it's like we just don't talk about those things. I wish my parents, and I urge parents all the time, talk to your kids, because if you don't, someone else will. Someone else will. I wish my parents would have talked to me about sex. I had no idea. I knew what sex was, but I didn't know, the preface of it. I just didn't know things in detail, and I was ashamed to ask questions, because if I couldn't talk about it at home, how could I gather the confidence and courage to talk about it outside of the home? So having conversations about sex and about safe and healthy relationships, those are good conversations to have with your kids. Let's face it, these are real life conversations. There's nothing to be ashamed about. These conversations should be had, right? It's a part of life. But these are things I wish my parents would have just given me the time of day on, right? If I had asked a question, I wish, that they would have entertained the question, right? Instead of saying, oh, we just don't talk about those things, right? I think that ultimately enabled me, because I was more curious, like, why can't we talk about these things? And then when I met Manaya, he's feeding me everything that I don't know. And I'm thinking he's right, because no one's talked to me about it. He has, so he must be right, So these are all things that as parents, just as good people, we should be thinking about, truthfully.
Excellent, excellent. And I'm gonna ramble on for just a minute about a few things here. If you can take a moment, there are a lot of amazingly good questions here in the Q&A. Can you get a grasp of what those are and just kind of summarize here in just a minute?
Right. Yes, absolutely.
So,
absolutely.
So yeah, just go ahead and do that. So I want to talk about a few things. So Alina mentioned stream of revenue. If you think about child exploitation, which is the recording in images and video of child rape and child abuse, which is a commodity in and of itself. It's traded as a commodity on dark websites. Human trafficking is all about the money. And she mentioned crimes unrelated to human trafficking, credit card fraud, ID fraud, on and on. There's so much. What I want to point out, as a former police officer, still remember at one time, human trafficking wasn't even a term we used. And I don't even want to get into, Doug Gilmer does an amazing job on the history of human trafficking here, going back to the early 1900s, when there was a lot of education, or actually the late 1800s, when we knew about it. And then, of course, World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, all these wars really, really took us out of this awareness. So when I was a cop, there was really no education on anything. And I remember stopping people where, and I'm just going to use the stereotypic role models of the guy was a bad guy. I knew he was, but when you stop, who had the gun and who had the drugs, who had the bad stuff? It was always the girl that was in there. And she's the one that would generally at least take the fall, or he'd point to her and say, I didn't know she had that on her. What I'm dealing with now, I have stepped out of government work sort of. I'm still doing training for law enforcement and prosecution, but I'm looking at this from a private attorney. When you're looking at forced criminality, vulnerabilities, as Alina said, vulnerabilities come into play heavily. She mentioned she didn't need shelter. She didn't need food. She didn't need the basics that you think of. She needed love and acceptance. And for you parents out there, she wasn't really allowed to get much experience in that. And then she is suddenly an adult in college, and now she's, trying to find her way. So if you're a parent, you have to learn to balance that and balance an education, how to educate them on online behavior, password hygiene. You got to learn how to balance your kids and prepare them for the real world where nobody's looking over their shoulder. But what I'm facing now with these vulnerabilities, in a lot of ways, they're survival. I'm dealing with one case right now, trying to assist a defense attorney. And Kasha Phillips is a local advocate. She's a survivor that works here. I just saw her earlier today. She stopped by the office. She's out now for Hub of Hope, assessing these victims that are in jail, facing decades in prison. This one became addicted to meth. She was homeless. She was living in an abandoned home. Alina mentioned those abandoned homes. This lady was living in an abandoned home. She had an addiction, a lot of trouble holding down a job, actually a lot of trouble getting a job. So this trafficker, I'm just calling him a trafficker, this guy offered her a place to stay, offered her food, if she would just do some work around there, do the laundry or do stuff. That's how it started off. Always, or not always, but a lot of times they'll start off very slow. And then, of course, he started expecting sexual favors from her. And then other guys would come over and he would expect sexual favors to them, and they paid him. Then he would expect her to go pick up drugs somewhere. And then he expected her to sell those drugs. Of course, he kept her habit going, and he was getting her food. And when the arrest went down, she got charged with those drugs. And yes, she was selling the drugs. And she was doing a lot of the things. But now that I can see the world a lot better because of Alina and Jessica and some of my survivor friends, it's not really a choice for them. The choice is, do I stay here and do this, or do I go back living in that abandoned building where I don't have a shower and I don't have food? I can't control the heat. I can't control the cold. I can't stay dry. And not only that, there's a danger of who knows who is going to come into that building and do whatever they do. So there's a lot of things that, when I say normal people, don't have to even consider and can't even imagine. So this forced criminality, we had another group that came through from Alabama, from Atlanta, actually, not Alabama, but came through from Atlanta with printers and checks. They stopped here in this area. They were just driving through the South. They would print checks off, fraudulent checks, and they would pick up homeless people. They would give those checks to the homeless and say, hey, if you'll go cash this check for me, I'll give you a little money, I'll give you some drugs, or I'll give you some food. And of course, the homeless people say, that's all I got to do is go cash this check. So they would go into banks, they would go into these credit unions, they would go into grocery stores, they would go in wherever and try to cash these checks. And sometimes they weren't successful, but quite a bit they were. This crew would hang around long enough for 2 or 3 weeks collecting this money, and then they would take off. Now, when I ask law enforcement, is that trafficking? A lot of people will say no, but there's something not right about it. But I say it actually is trafficking, and it does meet that definition. So one of the big things I wanted to get out of this talk today is I'm struggling right now to get local defense attorneys and local prosecutors to realize trafficking is not always just about commercial sex. And it comes into the life of a victim through his or her vulnerabilities. A lot of times these are kids. Now, you want to see vulnerable kids, look at these kids who are living in foster care or who maybe have a single parent or no parents at home, really. that's a vulnerability. The ones who run off, runaways that are on the streets. Now, I founded the National Child Protection Task Force several years ago, based on we focused on finding missing kids. And the more that we worked, the more of these kids we found that were being trafficked, that were being exploited in many, many ways. One of those ways, I still remember a group going into Dillard's and going into these stores, and they would have lists with them. And I remember arresting these kids and thinking, why have you got a list? But they were identified purses, identified other products that they were supposed to go and shoplift and bring back in exchange for a place to stay and food and all of that. And that is trafficking. And that's one of the things I really want to get across to everybody here, that we just don't have the ability to understand. This is trafficking. That brought money into the hands of those traffickers, and all of the burden was shifted over, all of the risk is shifted over onto the kids or onto people like Alina or onto these victims. So, and just to wrap this up, think about situations where, like if you were looking at this, how could you arrange a situation where somebody else takes all the risk, you have all the profit with minimal risk, and you have that cushion in between you that if something goes wrong, that person's going to get arrested, and I can just say, hey, I was just trying to help with a place to stay. And that's one of the big challenges that we have here. So, Alina, I'm done with my soapbox for just a minute. If you want to answer some of those questions that are on there, and then Aaron, I'm going to ask you if you have any SAR related or anything else. If you start thinking about those as we go through this. So, Alina, go ahead.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That was very informative, Kevin. Thank you so much. So to answer a few of the questions that have been sent in. So why did your charges, one of the questions is, why did your charges stick if you were exploited? Did they not see you as a victim? I was not portrayed, I was not seen as a victim, quite frankly. My environment, the times that I was arrested, I was in that trafficking environment, but because I was wanted for those charges, like the rental fraud and all that good stuff, I was not seen as a victim. Law enforcement were just focused on doing their job, right? I wouldn't say anyone's at fault here, right? This is why Kevin and I do what we do, right? We educate law enforcement, because what could have been an opportunity to offer me help, to engage with me, to find out what is going on. What is going on? How does somebody with no record all of a sudden start doing all these bad things? Like, what led her to this point in her life ended up being a missed opportunity, right? So unfortunately, those charges, completely unrelated to human trafficking, but all part of my exploitation, they stuck. Now, keep in mind, they no longer exist. But again, I'm just one person. Think about all the people that are trying to live their lives, that have gotten away from trafficking, that have gotten away from exploitation, and are having the hardest time just trying to get ahead because of forced criminality. So that's one of the questions. Another question is, let's see. So how did Manaya approach you? So we were, like I said, I guess you could say I was a nerd in school. I love school. I love learning. You will always find me at a conference, convention, classroom, at the front row. That's just who I am till this day. I just love learning. And I didn't really go out much with my friends. If I had a test, I was very responsible. But this particular night, I was feeling extra confident in the test that I had in the morning. I knew I was going to ace it. I couldn't have memorized it and learned it as much as I did, right? So when one of my girlfriends said, let's go out, and I said, there's no way, I have a test in the morning. She's like, you continue to say no, like, let's go out. And that was the night that I met Manaya. Now, keep in mind, here's something that I want to tell everyone. When I met him, we had mutual friends in common, so I considered him safe, right? I didn't consider him a stranger. I didn't consider him bad. There were mutual friends, and everyone seemed to love him because he was down to earth. He was friendly. He was cordial. So clearly he was not who he appeared to be, right? But because we had that mutual circle of friends, I felt it was safe, right? And that's typically what you're going to see with exploitation and trafficking. these victims are most likely going to know their abusers. They're most likely going to know their traffickers, because those traffickers will build that rapport with them, will build that trust with them, right? So Mania had to build the trust with me, but it was easy for him to initiate that because we had mutual friends. So I was already feeling like, oh, I can get to know him. Like he knows the people I know. So, so yeah, great question. Um, so one of the questions is what qualifies your situation as being defined as traffic? So at the beginning, that's a great question. So at the beginning, we talked about sex trafficking. So what is sex trafficking? It involves force, fraud, and coercion, right? Sex trafficking, and I'll give it to you as basic as it is. Sex trafficking is when a person is forced or coerced. Into having sex with somebody they don't want to, but there's some sort of monetary exchange, right? So many of you might say, well, that sounds like prostitution. Okay, well, this individual, this victim is being forced to have sex with these individuals for the financial benefit of the trafficker or pimp, however you want to address it. So what defined my story? What qualifies me as what qualifies my situation as being trafficked? I was definitely human trafficked because I did not want to have sex with 10 to 12 men a day, but I was forced to have sex with 10 or 12 men a day. What happens if I did not comply? I got beat. I got raped by my trafficker. It got to a point where if you don't want to comply, you'll start to comply because you'll get sick of the abuse, right? So I think that's what qualifies me to say that I've been trafficked, right? I don't have to have a fancy charge. I don't have to have a fancy degree or anything like that to say, hey, I think I've been trafficked. No, I know I've been trafficked. So if for some reason anyone knows anyone that's like, hey, this situation doesn't seem right, you might want to look into that. So that's what I guess qualifies me to be defined as a victim and survivor of human trafficking, especially sexual human trafficking, right? Great question. So another question is, was he threatening towards you? Is that why you felt the need to stay? So many of you have probably heard the term trauma bonding, right? It's a real thing. So yes, there were a lot of threats, and please note that psychological threats are much more proactive and are much more deadly than physical threat. You can heal from something physical. The psychological just eats you alive minute to minute, right? That's why I felt the need to stay. But keep in mind, I did try to escape. I did try to escape, and it went horribly wrong. It went horribly wrong. And I can tell you that after I got the consequences of trying to escape, I never bothered again. So great question. Why didn't she cry out to her parents? That's a great question. Why didn't I cry out to my parents? I got to a point with my trafficker where I just imagine being told every single day, right? And I'm just going to give you a plain example, right? Imagine being told every single day, you're ugly. You're ugly. You're never going to be anything in this world. Like, why would you think that you're going to get good grades in school? Or why do you think you can attain that job? Do you really think you're going to get that raise? Imagining somebody telling you that every single day. Guess what? Eventually, you're going to start to believe it. Eventually, you're going to think you're not worthy, that you're not capable of getting that job, that you're ugly, whatever it may be. Same thing pertains to trafficking. Same thing pertains to my situation, right? Being forced to be in this human trafficking realm, right? Being forced to see these men that I don't even want to see, right? It gets to a point where he was feeding me like, you're doing this for us. You're doing this for me. This is what you have to do. This is what real relationships do. This is what love is, right? You start to believe the BS, right? There's no other way to put it. You start to believe it. So hopefully that answers a question. So I never cried out to my parents because frankly, what was going to happen to me if I cried out to my parents, right? One, there's a good chance that I was probably going to go back to my trafficker. Think of domestic violence, right? It takes a victim probably 8 to 9 times before they even decide to leave their abuser, right? Same thing within human trafficking, right? And what was going to happen? What were my parents going to do? Call the cops because allegedly he was trafficking me. I mean, there's so many components that are added to this situation, right? So it never really occurred to me to cry out to my parents, which is kind of ironic because I did try to escape. I knew this wasn't normal, but I never really cried out to my parents. And keep in mind, I was, I'm American, born in the States, right? My parents were immigrants to this country, right? I could not bear the thought of bringing dishonor to my family. I could not bear the thought of breaking my mother's heart. So keep that in mind. There's a lot of cultural things that come into perspective. And sometimes, to be frank with you, it's not just cultural. I loved my parents. Here's a fun fact for you. I never shared my story until my trafficker passed away, is when I came forward with my story. And then when my dad passed away is when I went public with my story, because I refused to bring him any dismay or sadness. So keep that in mind. Sometimes we don't cry out, but there's a lot of reasons why we don't cry out or call for help. So great
And I
question.
think,
Hopefully that gave you insight.
yeah, that's really good. And one of our learning objectives is to understand the investigative and legal complexities in distinguishing victims from perpetrators. And hopefully that's been I mean, there's a lot of our learning objectives that are mixed in here, but the cultural aspect, I think that's a major point there of not wanting to dishonor your family.
Mm-hmm.
And we want victims, and I'm speaking as a prosecutor, that getting a victim to cooperate and testify, one, is just extremely traumatic in and of itself. Another thing is that a lot of them don't know that they're being trafficked, and once they figure out they're being trafficked, that power and control, just like the domestic violence cycle, it's such the trauma bonding is such a difficult thing to get over. Yet people who know nothing about this and have never been in a situation look at it and say, "Oh, if I was there, I would just do this."
Mm-hmm.
Not really. That's really not a fair statement. But in order to prosecute these cases, it's really difficult. Right now, trying to educate a prosecutor who says, I know what human trafficking is. I know what this looks like. And I'm saying, you've got a victim right in front of you. That's her trafficker. And I'm trying to show them how they can take this case where they've got charges against the victim and shift all of that back over onto the trafficker. And it's tough. It's tough from a prosecutorial perspective. And getting through the investigation. And so when you look at statutes, and I think everybody here, or most of the people here, have to deal with policies, and they know that if a policy says A, B, and C, I got to do A, B, and C. I can't just partially do one. Same thing with statutes. We have to meet these designations. And you mentioned the force, fraud, and coercion part. Now, if I have attorneys on here, we could spend all day talking about what force means, what fraud
Mm-hmm.
means, and what coercion means, and we're going to argue all day about that. So imagine presenting this to a jury. But I'm looking at the blue campaign. Human trafficking involves the use of force, fraud, and coercion to obtain some type of labor or commercial sex act. So that some type of labor, when you say crimes unrelated to human trafficking, I say as a prosecutor, that is human trafficking. And I would take that. All of those where you're going out to Best Buy and stealing electronics, or you're stealing gift cards or something like that in order for the trafficker to profit, that is human trafficking. And that's one of the things that we need to look at. Now, Aaron, I had some notes here. Let's see. And it's been a while. I've not done a whole lot of compliance or a lot of the financial side of this, but are you familiar with the money mule networks?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I thought you would be. Or pig butchering, or to everybody else listening here, another form of human trafficking. Let's say I get Alina, I get her pulled in. I may, depending on my goals and what I'm doing, have her sitting at a phone for 10 or 12 hours a day calling potential victims and trying to scam them out of their money. Big thing for the elderly. It's a big thing. We had, when I was the director of the Human Trafficking Response Unit, we had a doctor, an MD, a doctor hit for $2 million. We had 2 retired law enforcement got hit for hundreds of thousands of dollars out of their retirement. So don't think this can't happen to you or can't happen to somebody who's intelligent, because yes, it can. And those crimes is a lot of ways a fishing expedition. But Aaron, if you could talk about like some of the things that I had red flags on the compliance, like sudden inflows from many unrelated senders and fast outbound, or same device IPs used across multiple unrelated customers. I mean, just things of that nature. What can we look for in what Alina has been talking about?
I appreciate that one. I actually have a question for Alina first, which will get us into that particular objective that we did talk about. So, did Manaya have access to your mobile banking?
Oh, this is something I'm still struggling with till this day. And I live a very happy, blessed life. So he had access to, so back in 2012, I didn't really have mobile banking, but I had my debit card. But what he would do is while I was sleeping, he would take my debit card and go to an ATM at a gas station and take out as much money as he can, right? That's what he would do. The banks never flagged it for continuously, money being withdrawn within a certain amount of time. He also took out student loans. So it's look at all these things that were done. I was a victim of his illegal acts, right? So not only was I a victim of exploitation and all that, but to answer your question, I was also a victim of financial crime, right? My money being stolen from my bank accounts, him having access to my bank accounts by portraying himself as someone that he was not, right? Being able to just log in to my, how would he know that? Logging into my portal at the college and being able to accept additional loans in my name without ever there being any type of contact, right? So these are all things that were taking place. So I know that was a long answer, so I'm so sorry.
No, it was a perfect answer. I'm so happy you framed it that way, because the learning point on this one is when I was at Bank of America doing national security letters and suspected TF, terrorist financing investigations and the like, I sort of stumbled on the whole device ID and IP address thing. And the reason why I stumbled on it is because we started seeing in particular cases that there were pings on mobile banking on certain accounts coming out of, say, Lebanon for accounts that were supposed to be in New York or anywhere else in the United States, California, Texas, all over the United States. Why are these pings constantly coming out of Lebanon or a high-risk FATF country that may be war-torn, that sort of thing, high risk for terrorist financing? That is a huge red flag for terror financing, because that is actually the terror cells. What is it? The person running the cell or the leader or whatever has to check to see if the money is going in there from the Hawaladars. Same thing for human trafficking is a tip I want to give everybody here. The leader of the human trafficking ring or just the trafficker himself, just checking to see if his trafficking victim is putting the money in like they need to. That's that's not even a part of what the stuff that you mentioned, because they're doing stuff on their own and destroying your credit. And but they'll be logging in from maybe a different location. And if that's the case, then that's a huge red flag to be able to say, nope, stop. This thing is so weird, or all these school loans are kind of weird, and this girl is only this year old, or this whatever kinds of things you can put together. And the device ID will be so handy on that one, because if it's constantly coming from, say, a device ID that has certain IMEI numbers, but yours, whenever you log in, have your IMEI number and they don't match up. Now, that's also another issue within FIs, because FIs don't have the components set up between AML investigators to know and have access to all that information. And say the technical gurus, I call them gurus because they're so smart, the technical men and women who pull these things apart. And that needs to come together a lot more, because that's literally the evidence you need to blow up a terrorist cell, to blow up a trafficking ring, and save victims, save survivors, let them come out, and without having to put them on the stand, without having to have them testify or go through a more emotional trauma. You have the actual evidence right there, and financial institutions are so important in that. And that was the learning point that I wanted to talk about on that one. And you'll also know that you'll see be, like you mentioned, cash in, cash out. Well, how does that measure up to what you're doing for a living? You say you're a consultant. You say, what's the KYC? You say, what consulting gig do you do? Well, usually consultancies get paid in ACHs or, a paycheck in general, and it's all cash you're getting. Again, should be a completely no-brainer, huge red flag, and you should be looking at that and making calls, or if that's the policy of your FI, that sort of thing. Those are the things to be looking for. And lastly, my next question is, you said he passed away. Is that how you got out?
Yes. I see a few questions. I know many have asked. So he ended up passing away from a drug overdose. So after I went to jail and I got out of jail, I promised myself that I would never affiliate myself with him. I got away from him. Just that, like, there's no way this can be my life. Like, having that in me, there's no way this is going to be my ending. There's no way, right? Like, this is not what I want to do. This is not what I want to do. And to kind of give you a background, I mean, when I was in college, I was studying international relations. Like, my goal was to work for the CIA, right? It shows you anyone can fall victim to this, right? It just shows you, right? So he ended up passing away. He continued to traffic other victims. He did. He continued to traffic other victims. And traffic a number of them, I think like 6 more. And then he ended up passing away, ultimately dying from an overdose, right? Because he was addicted to drugs as well. But he ended up dying from an overdose. Once I knew he was dead, I actually went to his funeral to make sure he was dead and to make sure it wasn't a prank, because I wanted to make sure that I could live my life without looking over my shoulder. So once I knew he was dead and he could no longer haunt me or anything, I pretty much decided, I don't know, I had, like, I guess you would say, an awakening or a divine intervention. And I was like, there's got to be more to life. Like, I didn't go through this for no reason. Like, there's got to be something more. And I'm telling you, once he passed and I had that moment, my life changed, right? And it didn't happen overnight. It took years, right? I mean, it took years of learning and the curves and everything. But yeah, it wasn't until my father passed away in 2020 that I went public with my story. So when Manaya passed away is when I decided to join the anti-trafficking field. And everything ended up working out. And I mean, truth be told, and this is just me being as candid as possible, when I found out about the statue, he had already passed away. So he couldn't go to court and say that's not true, right? Because he didn't exist anymore. So that helped me too. It did, because believe it or not, some states will allow certain individuals, aka the traffickers, to go and testify against you. Against you. So all of these things to keep in mind. We still have a long way to go in this sector. We truly do. We still have a long way to go in this sector, but a lot of great work is being done.
So my next one on that one is, so he worked alone. He wasn't a part of a ring. There's nobody else he answered to. He didn't know anybody else. And that's my other part of the question is, do you fear now for those folks that may have worked with him, those men, for use of a better word, that work with him, or do those things? You don't worry from them?
I don't worry for them. I feel like who I am today, I'm so far separated from that life that I'll be quite frank with you. I don't even think they would remember me, to be honest. The person I am today from the person I used to be, I don't even think they would remember me. Even that guy who initiated me and who raped me into trafficking, like, he probably wouldn't even be able to recognize me in public if the opportunity came about. But it's just like, I'm so far distanced from that. And to be frank, I do so much work and have such a respect for law enforcement. I don't even think they would try, to be quite honest. I don't even think they would try, but I can only hope and pray that every victim and survivor gets to where I am in my life. And I say that in a peaceful way. I have so much peace in my life. That it's just never even crossed my mind, because the person that I am today, filled with so much peace and privacy and whatnot, I'm just like, at some point you got to decide in your life, do I want to constantly relive that nightmare? Do I want to stay in touch with certain people? They're not that bad. Or do I want to break free and put a hard stop to all of that? You have to make tough decisions. A lot of survivors they want to break free, but then they're like, oh, well, I'll feel bad if I'm not in touch with so-and-so. And it's like, it takes a hard decision. You got to make hard choices, right? Not every choice is going to be easy, right?
I can only imagine. Did you ever have to confront your bank or talk to your bank about the charges that were made? And what about your credit right now? How are you dealing with that?
Yes. So yes, I had like Bank of America. So when he would withdraw, I had Bank of America at the time, back in the day, because I was a college student. So they had like this deal. So when I went to them saying, I'm not the one withdrawing money from my account, it's my boyfriend. He did it, while I was sleeping. Yeah, that's an excuse. Sorry, we don't know what to tell you. Or like, sorry, you got to pay the overdraft fees, right? That would be their premise. Right now, the what I'm trying to navigate is like the student loans. We all know student loans don't go away, right? It's not like other things on your account that after 7 or 10 years they no longer exist, right? Or they go into hibernation. However, but like student loans never go away. So now it's me trying to prove like I didn't take out these student loans, my trafficker did. So it's trying to navigate that, because now it's literally like going through the system all over again. Now I've got to showcase it. Now I've got to prove it. Now I've got to somehow prove to these 3 big credit bureau companies that I never took out that loan. But it's very hard to do, because these loans, you can do it on your cell phone. All you got to do is click yes and agree to the terms and next, and that money will be ACH'd into your account instantly. So how do you prove to these companies that make it easy for you to attain these loans that you didn't attain that loan? So this is it's a big issue, not only for me, but for many.
And this, I think this gets us into the, oh, sorry. I was talking about just everybody listening here, just keep this in mind, the trauma-informed principles and compliance, reporting, engagement with potential trafficking victims. Sometimes you're going to hear a crazy story. Just remember your response. And yeah, there are people out here that are going to try to screw you over, but some of these are real. Sorry, Aaron, go ahead.
Yeah, it's just the device ID that we mentioned before. That's if law enforcement can ask that question a lot more, and I believe that they are when it comes to subpoenaing records and things like that, especially if you're an investigation in what you've dealt with, and if you can have these law enforcement officials say need the device IDs, and if they match up to what records the bank has for your account versus the device ID for another account, that could really help in that. But of course, that kind of information is really hard to get for privacy issues. So being able to skirt around that and deal with that is definitely something law enforcement would know how to do professionally. I'll kick it back to you, Kevin.
Right.
Yeah, and there's go ahead, Alina.
Oh, one thing I was just going to add to piggyback on what you were saying, Kevin, is imagine I come to you as professionals in this sector, and I'm just like, listen, it wasn't me that took out the loan. I was asleep. He hacked my phone. He needed $3,000. Would you believe me? So like Kevin said, sometimes you're going to hear crazy stories. I'm not saying that some of them might not be crazy. I'm just saying if you have the time, it'd be worth betting, right?
Yeah, because sometimes the dog does eat your homework. This kind of stuff just happens, right? There's one Delaney brought up about law enforcement in Canada. So I am somewhat familiar with some of the laws and some of the differences, but talking about a lot of trafficking happens along key highways and personal rental vehicles. How should we as law enforcement improve detection relating to traffic stops? And I'm assuming you can't ID everybody in the car. And then should we be holding police accountable to writing extremely detailed reports? What I would suggest is to get, and again, I would have to familiarize myself with what your laws are here in the U.S. If you conduct a traffic stop, of course, you have to go up, tell the person the reason that you stopped them, and then the clock starts ticking, and I'm just going to use the 15-minute mark. So we've had this 15-minute mark that you got to get whatever you're doing done and get them on their way unless something else pops up. So we used to call it concealed interrogation, where you're asking questions and you're looking at you're evaluating the people that are in there, and you're asking seemingly innocuous and innocent questions. But how are you going to know how to do that? Well, one thing, you've got organizations like ACFCS. I know you've got a lot of financial human trafficking, and there's other human trafficking training. So get a hold of Aaron for that. You've got places like Truckers Against Trafficking that I know have training modules set out for troopers here in the U.S. to identify human trafficking in that situation, but also get people like Alina, get survivors to talk, especially ones that have been trafficked along interstate routes, especially even between U.S. and Canada. Get them in to speak, talk to them, ask them questions. What did this look like? What were you doing? What were you thinking? How did you answer? Were you coached to answer? Are the people in this vehicle being coached? And that was one of the things, Aaron, I was wondering if the people here who do any kind of customer service in the financial sector, can you tell when somebody's being coached or somebody's being given a script? Is that a thing there?
You know, I'm not sure about customer service. I'm really not.
Right.
My husband used to run the call centers for a particular area of B of A. He's moved on to a different area of B of A, but there was training about how to try and find that. There is mandatory federal training in that as well that they have to take, but I'm not sure about specific actual call center employees, and that's actually a really good one. So if you want to see more of that, maybe we can get some folks coming to us. There's a survey here at the end of this. You can fill it out. Say, I worked at a call center, or I know what call center types of training are. I'd really love to learn more about that, because that would be a really good way to get that out more. I know they have some, but it's just a matter of what they have. I don't know.
Well, what I love to do, and I told you earlier, I love the flow. I don't like having a lot of scripted stuff, especially when I have somebody like Alina and I've got you here, Aaron. But what I like is this conversation that when Alina and I are talking, I know Aaron's getting these ideas, and then we get into that, and that turns into something else. But what is the difference between, let's say, customer service or customer contact in the financial industry and what those police officers are having to engage on the side of the road somewhere? You've got a limited amount of time. Are we developing relevant questions and behaviors that maybe we can identify to flag something to be turned over to more financial investigation within that realm? So just a thought.
No, absolutely.
Yeah, we should be putting together some more training specifically for frontline either tellers, which that's really good in the understanding and detecting human trafficking that we have up on our webpage for anyone to take the learning module. Maybe some specified webinars too about the customer service experience on the phones. That is different. They should be able to learn those different types of things to listen for or to hear. That's a really good idea. Now my hamster is spinning in my wheel, Kevin.
There we go. You have to get the right people on and having an open discussion and the free flow, and then we get some ideas. And let's see, what time is it? Oh, we got about 6 minutes left or less.
Yeah.
Alina, do you want to talk a little bit about your? Oh, go ahead, Aaron.
Go ahead,
For
Aaron.
the finance part, I also want to bring up another tip for folks to take away with. You mentioned the Backpage website, Alina. I'm so glad you brought that up, because it's so important for especially the investigators, AML and fraud investigators as well, to have a collection, meaning spreadsheet, work document, whatever, of all of these sites that you're realizing are sex sites, sex for sale sites, anything like that you can keep for yourself to say, hey, in my investigation, are my ACH transactions for my account that I'm looking at going out to any of these? And if it matches up, then that is definitely something that you want to flag as high risk. If it is a high risk appetite policy statement states that is a high risk for your firm as well. And you can say, due to transactions going out to this site and this amount of it, it's high risk, maybe it could be suspicious, and you could flag it up, and your investigation is not over, but it's at least flagged. And so I wanted to bring that one up too.
Yeah. No, that's really good, and that's helpful too. I noticed earlier in the chat, someone had mentioned that a certain website that took over for Backpage. The reality is, thousands of websites took over for Backpage.
Oh, wow.
So the reality is, this is a collaborative. Kevin speaks on this all the time. We cannot do this alone. It takes collaboration. So if you don't know how to identify those red flag or those high risks that Aaron was talking about, reach out to your law enforcement agencies, because at the end of the day, we have to work together. If you reach out to them, maybe sit down for a round table, a meeting, whatever it is you want to do, and say, what would you consider, what are the top 10, top 20, top 100 websites that are constantly being used that we could possibly flag as a high risk transaction, right? It's 2025, so a lot of these transactions, unfortunately, are being done on Zelle, are being done on Cash App, are being done on Venmo. But I mean, look at the notes. I kid you not when I say traffickers and victims will put a lot of things that might be helpful to you in the notes. Like, when you make a transaction, a transfer, right? For the other day, I was transferring my aunt some money, right? It was her birthday. So I put Dia's birthday, my aunt's birthday, right? I put it in the notes so I know, why did I send her, whatever I sent her. But you will have victims, you will have traffickers, especially victims that are trying to keep tabs for their traffickers, that will put in the notes 30 for 150. You might say, what the heck does that mean? 30 for 150, that could potentially mean 30 minutes for $150. 60 for 200, what does that mean? That might mean 60 minutes for 200. 2 roses for 30. 2 roses, emojis for 30. What the heck does that mean? Each rose is $100 for 30 minutes. So they paid $200 for 30 minutes. Knowing these emojis, knowing what they're trying to say in the notes. I don't know in this sector, Aaron, you might know, Kevin, you might know, if you're able to flag those certain things in the notes. But I would definitely pay attention to the notes. Like, why is this one person getting, so many transfers, and all the notes are like in emojis, or all the notes are, emojis and numbers? Like, what does that mean? Right. You can, if there's a way to flag these, please do. Please do.
That's a great suggestion there. The emojis are huge. And if you don't know what you're looking at, they're just white noise to everybody. Aaron, did you have something?
I was going to say, and actually write them out in your STAR narrative. When you're talking about the suspicious activity specifically in that little block that you should have in your STAR narrative, it's the free text, but still I have a template so you put it in the little block of what your suspicious activity is, and you can describe what you're seeing. You can say website, whatever, put the link there as well, and then say, in this website, the transfer showed, and then say, pick 2 pictures of 2 roses and the words 200 behind it. And they'll know what that means. Don't worry about laboring over how you should write it, laboring over how it should look. Just write it, put the link in there, and they'll know what to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And I know we've just got about 1 minute left. There have been some questions in here about how to transition into helping with human trafficking. And I want to tell you, human trafficking is a very complex, multifaceted crime type. There are organizations out here, if you specifically want human trafficking. I think Skull Games is probably the top one that I work with out here. Jeff Teagues, look into them. If you got OSINT skills, look into jumping into that. But I've traveled the world. I've been in many, many countries, including Afghanistan, Pakistan, and all these other places. And what it comes down to is we can have these webinars. I can go to DC, I can go all over around the world and talk. It looks great. But the most satisfaction I've got is when I do something in my own community. It's the community level activities. It's the action. If we do not have people executing at the community level, all of this is for nothing. So reach out to you, big brothers, big sisters. Reach out to your schools and see if they need people to come read to students, or to help out with the next generation. We definitely have to put time into them. And some of these kids don't have anybody. They don't have parents. So see where you can engage there. Work with the homeless in your communities if you can. Look for something to do in your own community where you can give back, and start there. And then keep your eyes open on a place where you can look from there. Aaron, I know we're out of time.
Yep. Oh gosh, you two are amazing. Please, please let us know what you think in the survey, what you want to hear more of and see more of. Join us on October 28th. That is the next Metcalf series installment, and we are going to. I'm just going to run with this. We're going to be talking about age verification and children's access to pornography. We're going to be talking a lot about tech stuff, and we're really going to get into how our youngest, most vulnerable population is being exposed to this and what that means, how we can help stifle that, hopefully, in the financial crimes compliance industry. October 28th. Thank you so much to Alina. Thank you again very much to Kevin, and we love you both. Thank you so much for being here, and we really appreciate everything you do.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.